We're going to start the question period with questions from your advisory team.
Well done, Mr. Kerr. Chelsea unfortunately could not be here, so she sent me her question for you via text message. Chelsea would like to know, if you were to do this project again, would you go about any of the parts differently regarding the process? Also, maybe if you know someone starting out, either building a forge or making a blade, what piece of advice would you give them?
If I wanted to redo it, I think I'd want to get, oddly enough, higher grit sandpaper for my belt grinder. It gave me the most trouble, because when I was trying to do the bevels on my first knife, it was taking off the smallest amount of metal possible, so that's why they only went up like 4 centimeters in total. And for anyone starting out, I wouldn't worry about the forge too much, because it's a really simple thing to build in the end. It's very basic. I would focus on, again, the bevels of the knife, because I found those the hardest, because they have to be straight and they have to end up being all these different types of things.
Thank you. And my question for you, Mr. Kerr, is you've given us an excellent account of the history of smithing and an account of smithing in a modern context. What are your predictions for the future of smithing, and where will we go next?
Well, I don't really know where we could go, because we could go back in time. We could go forward. But it's so far, the direction of it, we're going to use it in an industrial age, where nowadays we have huge machines that pound red hot steel into these huge creations for like industrial type warehouses, and all these like giant machines that can manufacture tons and tons and tons of things.
Well, hi Ryan. First of all, I just want to say I'm really impressed by that final knife you put out. It looks really great, and it's completely beautiful. I was just wondering, did you have any problems with the heat treat other than catching fire? Like, did you experience any like warping or cracks or anything like that?
At one point, not really cracks. The most trouble I experienced with is it not being even enough.
Oh yeah.
It didn't really happen along the very edge of the blade, luckily, so it kind of happened near the top where the heat wasn't distributed equally and parts of it wasn't properly heat treated.
Okay. So furthermore, have you tested on any things? Like, have you chopped any stuff, and did your edge hold up?
I have chopped paper, and it kind of just sliced it off, so I was very happy to get it very, very sharp.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, it looks really great.
Thank you.
Mr. Kerr, I have a question for you that I think I know the answer. Are we allowed to pass around your knives?
No.
How about I answer that for you?
No.
Would it be okay if people came up and look at them at the end of the presentation?
Just be careful. For the curved one specifically, I cut myself very badly on it. I found out it was very sharp. I almost needed stitches. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to look and not touch afterwards. Ryan, Mr. Kerr, my question for you is, what started your interest in blacksmithing?
Well, I'd seen it a lot. I've seen blacksmiths at like Fort Langley and other places like that, and it always interested me because you can make all these cool, intricate things with just using hammers and an anvil, and you can make all these beautiful types of metalworks.
Can you tell us about your advisors and their careers in blacksmithing and how that might interest you?
Well, for my advisor, Ishan, he has his own metalwork business, and he does a lot of welding and all these cool, fascinating things. He actually taught me how to use a MIG welder, which was very, very exciting for me to use for the first time. And my other advisor, Chelsea, she worked on Game of Thrones. She makes all these cool, beautiful, like rings and necklaces. And while doing this process, she was actually in Ireland filming the end of Game of Thrones.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. So if you have a question, put up your hand, and I will try to get to you.
Ryan, I so enjoyed it. It's beautiful. As a graphic designer, I have a question for you. I'm wondering if you've already thought about your mark that you'll place on your sword or knives in the future?
You know, I was thinking about adding the slide, and I figured no one was going to ask that question. But yes, I do have my own touch mark. Ryan means little king, so basically it's a crown with 3 dots above it.
Oh, I love that idea. Thank you.
Mr. Kerr, impressive work. My question is a little bit technical. You mentioned about, I think you said it was quenching in the vegetable oil. How does that oil perform versus others? And if you were to continue, would you use the same oil, or would you change to something else that would perform differently?
I'm pretty sure almost all oil just performs the same. It just, because they're all like the same type of substance. I think I just keep using vegetable oil because it's cheap, and when I forage, a lot of it spills out and it bubbles and it kind of makes a mess, so I can continually just keep going back to that.
Would you change the kind of container? I think you mentioned that it
Yeah.
it
So
shrank or
far,
something.
I've only used plastic containers, and I can't use them again because they're all like now.
Right, so perhaps a metal container
Yeah,
or
like
something.
a
Right.
can or
Okay.
anything type of metal-y.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Ryan, Mr. Kerr, great presentation. I just wanted to ask you, what's your favorite Damascus pattern?
The one you saw on screen.
Okay.
I think that one looks the coolest.
What's it called?
They don't really have names. This is like the folded over, turned around,
Okay,
squenched one.
pretty standard.
I'm noticing there's a sword on the black table with the one with the holds on it. Did you make that one? Yes.
That was just something I brought for show, to show like ornamental guards, because if you look closely, you can see there's a whole bunch of inscribed pictures in there, and they're really cool. I wish I made it, though.
Oh, no.
Hey, Ted.
Mr. Kerr, well done. A couple of questions. When you built your handles, in both cases, you said you and your dad on a table saw cut the groove. I'm trying to get my head around how you actually did that. So how did you do that?
Well, you see, table saw's flat, and then the saw comes out from underneath. So basically, we just push the wood in towards, so it created groove inside. It would cut the wood out, and then we left enough space at the end, so we wouldn't do a full cut. We just do partial cuts, and then I'd carve the inside out.
Okay. And you said for the other one, the wooden handle one, you burnt a hole through that. So how did you do that?
Well, there was another blade exactly like that, and I heated, and they had the same type of tang inside, and I heated it up in my forge, and basically I just stabbed it in, aiming for the middle.
Oh. And you said you like coal better than propane, but then you said you use briquettes. Is that what you mean? Is that what you use, briquettes?
No, briquettes was just at the start
Okay.
because coal is very, very hard to find. There's no sellers in Vancouver. I had to get it mailed in. So I used briquettes at the start because they're kind of the same thing, and they heated it up enough.
One piece of advice, if you like. If you look at the old Masterworks binders in the school somewhere, and you go back to 1995, which is the first year the school started, there's a guy named Dustin Pritchard who actually did close to what you did in terms of making his own knives. So you might want to read his Masterworks because it's kind of interesting.
I think I might. Maybe I can learn from his mistakes.
And the second thing, quick story, I know where that sword came from. That sword up on the table right there. That's Miss Rapley's sword. She was on Quebec trip, and she decided in her infinite wisdom, while on a school excursion in which we flew from Quebec by airplanes, she decided that it would be a good idea to buy a sword. So that's her sword that we had to deal with Air Canada.
Smooth, Bev.
You have very experienced advisors, it seems, Ryan.
I would have done the same thing.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Kerr. Any ambitions for a next project that might be different than a hand knife? Like, what other things might you consider on the horizon for you with this type of learning?
I'm looking into making a dagger. I tried making one, and right now it's hanging up on my workshop wall because I kind of failed at it. Yeah, I'm gonna look into making a dagger and something that's longer and has a bigger blade, something that's, just a bigger project in general.
Great.
Students, any questions?
Mr. Kerr, excellent presentation. Would you ever consider building something other than a weapon?
Possibly if I was bored.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerr. My question, through your experience in doing the Masterworks on forging, do you have any practical advice for homeowners when we go out and look for a knife? Characteristics of a knife that might be helpful, because we all have dull knives in our drawers, and I'm wondering if your experience can help us with respect to purchasing a quality knife. What are the types of things we might be looking for?
Well, it depends on what you're going to use the knife for. As I said before, you're not going to buy a butter knife to cut through a steak, are you?
No.
So basically, you gotta buy depending on what you are going to use it for. Also, buy a good metal, not a cheap.
What's a good metal?
Something that won't break.
So when I go and talk to the vendor, is there a type of or a quality of the steel or a ratio of the
they
metals?
Have different ratings. So there's 78A. So I don't know them off by heart because there's a lot of them. But I think higher the rating, the harder the steel, which means it'll hold an edge longer.
Perfect. So I could ask someone about the rating of the particular
Yeah.
knife steel. Excellent. Thank you.
Problem.
Great job. So what do you think that this project will affect your future career? Do you think you'll go into something with forging or
Well, I think
blacksmithing?
it'll affect my future career. Maybe, yeah. I was thinking of making my own knife-making business, because why not? I need something to do. Yeah, that's about it, really. I wasn't thinking of going into something specifically.
Okay, cool.
I'm not selling that one. That one's mine.
Ryan, Mr. Kerr, there is a resurgency of an interest in handmade goods, including blacksmithing like this. So you might actually find yourself a career. The last question I have is, 3 years ago, Miles Bailey also made a sword, but he used a laser cutter. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that actually doing the blacksmithing with the anvil and the hammer would be much more satisfying than a laser cutter. What's your opinion on that?
It's way more satisfying because with the laser cutter, you're kind of cutting out a sheet of steel. It's kind of like using scissors, only the scissors are very hot. But with forging, you kind of get a very satisfying thunk whenever you move a piece of metal, and you can slowly see your transformation.
Yeah. Come on up, friend.
Great presentation. Do you have any, what are you going to do with the knives now that you've made them? Are they just going to hang on your wall? Are you going to use them for cooking? If you do make a weapon, do you plan to use it?
Well, I made the very fancy one to bring on the solo we do, hopefully. So I have to talk to the teachers about that one. I don't see that, Jen. I wouldn't use them. They're probably going to hang on my wall. about it.
Well done. I wanted to ask you, in doing any of your research and things did you look at swords at all and how swords are forged and what they do with swords that are different than knives?
Yes. For swords, it's different because it depends on what type of swords you're making. Some swords have double bevels on each side. So basically, that means on each side they're sharp, right? Some swords have one side that's sharp, like a Japanese samurai sword. It's harder to make bevels on both sides for a sword because basically if you hit one end, other end's going to go up. However, the process is more or less much the same. The one thing you really have to keep in mind is the balance, because if your weight's all the way at the front, you're going to kind of fall forward.
Did you look at how they fold metal and things like that into swords? Is that something that would interest you, is learning how metals are folded into each other to create sword blades?
You mean like Damascus steel?
The way that it's folded on top of itself, though.
I don't know exactly what you mean. I know that some people, they mixed metals to create a very, very sharp blade because of the mix.
Mm-hmm.
But
I don't know either. That's why I'm asking.
I've never seen someone fold the metal in half. That's mean like making a weird shape of blade that kind of goes back down.
I've only heard that they would fold different layers to keep tensile strength and things like that.
No, usually they'll just make it out of one piece. That gives it the best sturdiness.
Great, thank you.
Hey,
A
Reed.
question from your
Or Mr.
comrades?
Mackenzie.
Very, very well done, Mr. Kerr. Do you think that your skill level has reached a height where you could forge something else like an impossible triangle?
Well, I think my skill level has most definitely improved from the start, Reed, as you can see with my first knife, going to my most recent knife. However, I'm going to stick to blades and not forge impossible triangles. Thank you very much.
With that, I am going to say that we have reached the end of our question period. We're going to have a 10-minute break where you can go outside. We're going to be back here at the top of the hour, and I will give an announcement about Mr. Kerr's presentation, and then we'll start with our next one sharp at 10 o'clock. So thank you very much for your attention.
I'd like to stay here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Masterworks of 2018. I am going to, before we begin with our next student, say a few words about Mr. Kerr, and he has just met with his advisors who have debriefed the whole process, and it's been a year that he's been working on his forge and making his swords and knives, and they have come to the conclusion that he has met all the requirements of the Masterworks program.
I just completed my worst fear.